Hey everyone, today we're gonna take a look at the Marvel Legends 6-inch action figure 2-pack of Silk and Doc Ock. Here's a quick look at the box. On the front we have the renders of the two action figures. Behind the two figures in the background, there's artwork of Silk and Doc Ock, and the styles of the artwork are completely different, reflecting the different times that these two characters were created. At the bottom we also have a stylized Silk logo, but none for Doc Ock. At the top of the box, we have that Spider-Man 60 years anniversary logo. And on the bottom, some product information as well as half of Spidey's face. On the side of the box, there's a very realistic style of artwork of the two characters. And the back of the box, renders of the characters plus the accessories that they come with. There's some Spider-Man comic artwork and comic covers in the background. More product information at the bottom. And down to that last side, there are renders of the two characters in more neutral vanilla poses. So let's go ahead and get this box open. With Hasbro's plastic-free packaging, these figures are held in place by a cardboard insert. The rest of the accessories are kept in paper baggies, and you can see that some of the accessories have dropped out already. The first paper baggie contains Doc Ock's two tentacles, which are strangely packed separately from the other two that are inserted onto that cardboard insert. The next smaller paper baggie contains the rest of the accessories for this set. And finally, we're going to free the figures from the cardboard insert. The skinnier figure, of course, is Silk, while the bulkier figure should be Doc Ock. And here he is. Doc Ock comes with one interchangeable head, two interchangeable hands, one pair of tentacles that are sculpted in an S shape, and another pair of tentacles that are sculpted in the C shape. Both sets of tentacles are sculpted in a metallic looking grey plastic, and as far as I can tell, they are exactly the same sculpt that came with the previous release of Doc Ock. They're both sculpted with pegs at the bottom, as well as segments that go all the way down those tentacles. And at the top of those tentacles, there are some 3-fingered grippers. In the middle of those grippers, there's a bit of blue paint, and this blue paint is applied quite sloppily, as you can see over here, so that's a bit disappointing. The grippers are also articulated on a ball joint at the end of the tentacle, so that lets you swivel those grippers 360. However, there's not much range of movement sideways, so the ball joint just only functions well as a swivel. And of course, those tentacles plug into the ports on the back of the figure. However, once again, these tentacles are sculpted in a fixed position, so they do not articulate and are just left flailing in the air. The interchangeable hands are cast in a bright yellow plastic. They articulate inwards as well as outwards. These hands pop onto the figure just fine, so you have a complete set of hands that are open, as well as a complete set of fists. His alternate head is the same sculpt as the previous release, and this time the default head is the newly sculpted one. Both heads have a good contrasting expression. The alternate head has a more neutral expression, but of course he's got his lips pursed, so he looks mean, while the new default head is sculpted sneering, gritting his teeth. The sculpting is similarly sharp on both heads. You can see the lines and wrinkles on his forehead and his furrowed brows, as well as small lines down the sides of his cheeks as well. Both heads have the same sculpt of the shades, which is cast in the same metallic looking grey plastic and has black paint for the lenses. The two heads also share that same brown hair sculpt with quite a wispy texture, and that's attached as a separate piece on top of the head. The back of the head has brown paint for the shorter part of his hairstyle. And coming back to the front of those head sculpts, I just like to point out that the paint on the faces are all applied quite sharply using the digital printing technique. And you can see how those eyes are even painted beneath those shades. I like how the paint for his lips as well as his teeth are also very sharp with no bleeding whatsoever. And of course the alternate head sculpt pops on just fine. And I'd just like to say I really like the treatment of these two head sculpts in terms of sculpt and paint. Now looking at the rest of the sculpt of the body, and there are no surprises here because his body is completely reused from the previous release. He just has a brighter shade of yellow and green for his outfit. The upper torso is cast in a bright green plastic, and that's got some good sculpting textures for the fabric down the middle of his chest. The bright yellow paint is applied to the top part of the torso, and there's also some flesh tone paint for his neck. The plastic on his upper part of his torso really doesn't match up with his lower torso, as you can see the difference in the level of glossiness. So that's a bit distracting. His lower torso is also cast in a green plastic, and there's also yellow paint for the belt strap that goes around his waist. Looking at his arms, they are cast in a green plastic. Some sculpted folds for the fabric as well on the sleeves. His gloves are a separate yellow plastic that's attached to his forearm. Onto the back of the torso, we have those ports for the tentacles, and those ports are painted in silver that kind of matches the metallic looking plastic on the tentacles. The main body of the figure has quite a portly stature, and you can see that same thickness in his arms as well as his legs. His legs also have the same treatment as his arms, some sculpted detail to show some wrinkling in the pants, and that green plastic of his legs then contrasts with the bright yellow plastic of his boots. Some sculpted detail on the boots as well, for the lines and the seams at the top as well as down the middle. For articulation, his head is on a ball hinge, so it does spin 360. There's almost no sideways tilting going on. He does have a good range, able to look down that much, as well as up quite a fair bit. Swivel hinge at the shoulders, so it spins 360 and coming out just that much. He's got an upper bicep swivel for 360 spin. Double jointed elbows that still have those pins visible and gets about just over 90 degrees of bend. Swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 spin and articulating in and out. He's got a mid-torso ball joint that allows you to spin him 360. He does get some sideways tilting as well as some forward range that much and some backward range. And the backward range really exposes his big tummy. He's got ball jointed hips that are extremely stiff, but they do come out sideways that much. There's not much range backwards, but he can go forward that far. And I'd just like to say that those ball joints are really stiff, so you might want to be careful with them in cold weather. He's got an upper thigh swivel for 360 spin. Double hinge at the knees, once again with those pins still exposed, but that gets you quite a good range of bend. He's got a calf swivel at the boot, so that's 360 spin. He's got a hinge at his ankles that get you a good range upwards and downwards. And finally, some good ankle pivot outwards and inwards. So there's no surprises with Doc Ock, and I do mean that in the bad way. The tentacles still have very limited posability, and while I do like the option of the alternate head as well as hands, I don't think that's much value to be had with this figure. As for Silk, she comes with one right fist, a left open hand, a pair of gripping hands, one web shooting hand, as well as a masked head. These hands are cast in a black plastic with red paint for the fingers. They articulate inwards as well as outwards. So coupled with the hands that come on by default on the figure, she gets a complete set of open, relaxed hands. You have the option for fists as well. And lastly, some gripping hands, even though she doesn't come with any accessories to hold. But of course, it's always possible for you to make your own spider webs out of bendy wire, and you can get her to hold those and get into action poses. The web shooting hand is cast in a translucent white plastic, and that lets the light through quite well. There's black paint for the hand itself, as well as red for those fingers. The web shooting looks like fibers, and I suppose that's how she gets her name Silk, by spinning the webs out from her fingertips. And there's also some more sculpting to show thicker parts of the fibers as they intertwine and bunch up over here. So you can twirl that bit of web and have that web shooting hand on. It looks quite nice when you pair it with that gripping hand and your own homemade webs. Her two head sculpts are beautiful. With the benefit of digital sculpting, you can see that a lot of features on the two head sculpts are the same. The hair all the way down to the nose is probably the same digital sculpt, while the masked head over here just has a piece of cloth pulled over the lower part of her face. Both head sculpts also have the same digital dot matrix printing technique for the paint applications on the face. So once again, you see really sharply painted eyebrows and also very nice bright brown eyes. You can even see the shape of those pupils in her irises, which is great work. The masked head sculpt, of course, has red paint for the mask, while the unmasked one has some paint for her lips, and that's a nice hue of pink, and she sculpted with a slight smirk on her face, which brings some personality to this sculpt. Both hair sculpts are the same. They are cast in a black plastic and separately attached to the head. Nice sculpting work for the different wisps of hair, and there's also a blue overwash, and that really brings out the texture and shape in that bob hairstyle. And of course the masked head sculpt pops onto the body just fine. The overall sculpt of the rest of her body is mostly reused from the Shriek mold, and that means you get those pinless double jointed elbows and knees, and we also saw that same mold being used on Spinneret. The upper part of her torso is used from that same part as we saw on Spinneret, and that also means that we get some slightly unsightly peg holes on the top part of the back. Being on the Shriek body mold, besides those pinless elbows and knees, she's also got a fuller figure, having more muscular arms and thighs, and that really contrasts quite a bit with the skinny sculpt on the previous release of Silk. You can also see that fuller sculpt of her body when you come to the side of the figure, with more muscular arms as well as thighs. Paint deco wise, they are quite similar, with the palette of white and red paint used for the design elements on her outfit. I do like how the newer figure looks more proportionate, with a smaller head sculpt compared to the slightly oversized one on the previous version, and her fuller figure makes her look more convincing as an athletic spider character. Comparing the two head sculpts, the new one is definitely a vast improvement, not only because of the digital dot matrix painting technique that gives her sharper paint applications, but also because she has a nicer sculpt on her face. She's got fuller lips and also softer features, which are appropriate to her Asian ethnicity. The sculpt of the mask is exactly the same, but it's now finished in a slightly shinier red plastic. The web lines on her torso are also skinnier and finer, and that definitely makes the paint finish look more high quality. However, they do both suffer from the same issue, which is the web lines not aligning between the upper part and the lower part of the torso. So it's quite disappointing to see Hasbro not solving those web lines connecting properly between both figures. The white paint finish on the new figure appears to be slightly thinner than the previous one, so the white appears slightly grayer shade compared to the previous release. Likewise, we see the same white stripes that continue down the sides of the arms. However, the alignment on the previous figure is much better compared to the new one, which when you have posed in a vanilla neutral stance, those lines don't want to match up with the torso. And moving down to the legs, we see that those same stripes also painted the same way. They are curved down the front of her thighs, going onto the insides and finishing off at the back. I'd just like to point out that the new one has those stripes nicely applied, matching on both sides, while the previous release might have some alignment issues. There's also similarly white paint on her heels, and also some applications of those white stripes on her toes as well. For articulation, her head is on a ball hinge, so it does spin 360. You get quite a good range of sideways tilt as well because of her short hairstyle not getting in the way of the neck range. And she also gets quite a good range looking downwards as well as upwards. She's got a swivel hinge at the shoulders that go 360 as well as coming out quite a good bit. Upper bicep swivel for 360 spin, double jointed pinless elbows for good range, swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 spin as well as articulating in and out, ball joint at the mid torso, so that's 360 spin, some good tilting sideways as well, and also quite decent range forward ab crunch as well as backward bend. Ball joints at the hips, so they go out but not a complete split. No problems forward and backward. Upper thigh swivel for 360 spin. Double jointed pinless knees, that gets you a very good range. Ankle hinge for upward tilt and downward tilt. And finally ankle pivot outwards as well as inwards. We are quite familiar with the scheme of articulation on the Shriek body, so this figure is no different and is quite a joy to pose around. And between the two versions of the figures, The hand pegs as well as the neck pegs are the same size, so those hands and head sculpts are swappable between both figures. Doc Ock stands at just over 6 inches, and that's just under 15.5 centimeters. While Silk stands at just under 6.25 inches, and that's over 15.5 centimeters. They scale well with some recently released Spider-Man figures, scaling well with other Spider-Verse characters as well, scaling well with other Spider-Man villains as well. For comparisons with other lines, here they are with some G.I. Joe Classified series and some Star Wars Black series. The timing of this release is strange because these two characters had pretty recent releases. While Silk is a definite upgrade, I cannot say the same about Doc Ock because he's saddled with the same weaknesses as the original version. Furthermore, Hasbro has stuck them together as a 2-pack, so I don't feel this pack brings sufficient value to the casual collector unless they don't already have these characters in their collection. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, subscribe to this channel, or even hit that super thanks button. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.